Hey Rowan, this is another poem by Rudyard Kipling. Um, this one's called Tommy, and there's a whole bunch of things that I gotta set up for it about this. Tommy was a British slang for a soldier. Tommy Atkins was another, it was Tommy Atkins was the generic soldier. So he was the GI Joe, he was the enlisted man, he was the general British term for a grunt. And this was back in the era where the British Army all wore red coats, which, in modern times where the armies run around in camouflage so they can't be seen doesn't make sense. But the way the wars were fought back in the 1800s, early 1900s, it made sense for everybody to be dressed alike, everybody wearing bright colors. Because when you crest the hill and you see this huge wall of red coming at you, that was kind of impressive. And what would happen is that the redcoats would show up, and they would be there with their guns and their bayonets, and they would just scare the bejesus out of everybody. And everybody would run, and everybody would panic. And when they would panic, bad things would happen to them because bad things always happen when people panic. So don't panic. Anyway, so the British Army, it was referred to at the time as the Thin Red Line because there was a battle, and the British were hopelessly outnumbered. It was going to be a massacre. And so instead of being in these big columns, 8 men deep, it was just this thin line of like 2 men, and they held the field. There they were with their bayonets and their guns, and they held the field. And it was referred to as the Thin Red Line of Heroes. And so this Thin Red Line of Heroes is carried on into modern times where, you hear about the thin blue line of policemen protecting civilization from crime. Or anyway, the Thin Red Line became the Thin Blue Line. And anyway, the poem is called Tommy. And this was a poem that Kipling wrote to celebrate the common soldier and to talk about some of the issues that they have. And, your dad was a sailor. Your Uncle Derek was a sailor. And so they understand, it's hard work being in the military. And sometimes it's underappreciated. And this was a way of kind of celebrating them. So here's the poem. I went into a public house to get a pint of beer. The publican he up and says, "We serve no redcoats here." The girls behind the bar, they laughed and giggled fit to die. I outs into the street again and again to myself says I, "Oh, it's Tommy this and Tommy that and Tommy go away." But it's thank you, Mr. Atkins, when the band begins to play. The band begins to play, my boys, the band begins to play. Oh, it's thank you, Mr. Atkins, when the band begins to play. I went into a theater as sober as could be. They gave a drunk civilian room, but hadn't none for me. They set me to the gallery or round the music halls, but when it comes to fightin' Lord, they shove me in the stalls. For it's Tommy this and Tommy that and Tommy wait outside. But it's special train for Atkins when the trooper's on the tide. The troop ship's on the tide, my boys, the troop ship's on the tide. Oh, it's special train for Atkins when the troop ship's on the tide. Yes, making mock of uniforms that guard you while you're asleep is cheaper than them uniforms and their starvation cheap. And hustling drunken soldiers when they're going large a bit is 5 times better business than parading in full kit. That it's Tommy this and Tommy that and Tommy owes your soul, but it's a thin red line of heroes when the drums begin to roll. The drums begin to roll, my boys, the drums begin to roll. What's a thin red line of heroes when the drums begin to roll? We ain't no thin red heroes and we ain't no blackguards too, but single men in barracks most remarkable like you. And if sometimes our conduct isn't all your fancy pants, why single men in barracks don't grow to posture saints. When it's Tommy this and Tommy that and Tommy fall behind, but it's please walk to the front, sir, when there's trouble in the wind. There's trouble in the wind, my boys, there's trouble in the wind. Let's please walk to the front, sir, when the trouble's in the wind. You talk of better food for us and schools and fires and all. We wait for extra rations if you treat us rational. Don't mess about with cookroom slops, but prove it to our face. The widow's uniform is not the soldier man's disgrace. For it's Tommy this and Tommy that, and chuck 'em out the brute. But 'tis savior of our country when the guns begin to shoot. And it's Tommy this and Tommy that, and anything you please. But Tommy ain't a bloomin' fool, you bet that Tommy sees. So, that's Tommy by Rudyard Kipling. Hope you enjoyed.